In this lecture, we'll talk about the different branches within the study of economics, different ways of viewing and making statements about economics, and we'll compare different types of economic systems. Now, the study of economics is generally split up into two disciplines, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics looks at the economy from an up-close and personal view. It looks at the decisions that consumers and producers make as individuals and how the price of goods is determined in the market. Some examples of what an agricultural microeconomist are whether or not a grain producer decides to grow more wheat or barley because of variations in the price of these two goods. A consumer might decide to buy organic strawberries over conventional strawberries because of an article they recently read about pesticide use. Maybe a microeconomist looks at how dairy farmers decide to spend money on new equipment. Macroeconomics, as you might guess, takes a more zoomed out view. It looks at whole economies and the factors that influence them rather than at individual people and firms. Some things that an agricultural macroeconomist might look at are how government policies like subsidies influence production levels of certain crops, how changes in interest rates may affect whether or not farmers choose to take out loans for new equipment and technology, or how extreme weather events like droughts and floods can impact the yield and cause changes in the market. Let's take a quick pause and write down your thoughts here. Let's answer these two questions. If you were a microeconomist, what is a research question you may have about the strawberry industry? Our second question is, if you were a macroeconomist, what is a research question you might have about the grain market? Now, be creative here and think about zooming in microeconomics versus zooming out macroeconomics. All right, pause the video and go. Another distinction we make in economics is between positive economics, which describes the world as it really is in a quantitative fashion, and normative economics, which describes how an ideal world would or should be. An easy way to spot the difference between normative statements and positive statements is that normative statements often have a value judgment attached to them or use words like would, should, or could. Some examples of some positive statements are increase in interest rates have decreased farmer loan adoption by 3% this year. This is a fact, not an actuality, but the way that this is stated is factual. Another one could be health trends have caused an increase in sales of alternative milks over the past 5 years. We can actually measure the increase in sales, so this is a positive statement. Or late spring frosts during the flowering period may cause northeastern apple production to drop this year. Now, the word may in this one might be a little bit confusing, but it's still a positive statement because we have precedents for late spring frosts affecting the apple crop. And it's just kind of a given that when there are frosts late, it damages the crop and farmers don't produce as much. Now, some examples of normative statements are the government should regulate interest rates so farmers can afford loans. There's that word should. Health research should focus on the benefits of dairy to promote its sales. Again, a should. Northeastern apple farmers should diversify their crops so they can still sell produce when there are late frosts. These are all things that don't reflect the way that the world actually is right now. They reflect how someone thinks the world should be in order to maximize the welfare of all the players involved. So now we know what economics is. What are economic systems? Put simply, they are the framework a society or government uses to organize and distribute resources, goods, and services. There are many types of economic systems in theory, and in fact, economists are coming up with new ones all the time. They often take a positive view of economics, how the world really operates, and a normative view of economics, how the world should be. And they use these two views to design new systems in which some of the problems of current systems, problems like poverty, inequality, overconsumption, environmental damage, or maybe corruption, are reduced or non-existent. Later on in the semester, we'll be looking at these ideas a little bit closer. But for now, let's talk about the big three systems. These are the three systems most commonly discussed: capitalism, socialism, and communism. We're probably all familiar with the term capitalism since we live in a mostly capitalist society. Now, capitalism is a free market system, meaning that the prices of goods and services, as well as the decisions about what goods and services are produced, is determined by supply and demand rather than a central government. So individuals within the economy are the ones collectively driving the market in one direction or another. Under capitalism, individuals and firms own and use resources as they choose. Here in the United States, we can decide to buy a parcel of land or a house. We can decide to start a business of whatever we want without interference from the government, for the most part. Specialization, along with choice, those two big principles that we talked about earlier on, those are what push the market toward prosperity. And this is what our friend Adam Smith called the invisible hand of the market. Most countries around the world operate under a mostly capitalist mixed system. Take the US, for example. Goods and resources can be privately owned and used as their owners see fit, within the extent of laws put into place by our democratic government. It's a free market, but the government still has a say in how the market operates. The invisible hand of the market, how we decide to spend our money or produce different goods, is what drives it, but government oversight with things like the taxes that we pay, regulatory laws, price controls, subsidies, import and export taxes, etc. Now, socialism differs from capitalism in that the means of production, which is a fancy way of saying the resources used to produce goods and services, are controlled by a democratic state government rather than individuals or private companies. Now, this idea, articulated and popularized by Karl Marx in the 1800s, came about as a response to the exploitation of workers and the wealth inequality that exploded with the Industrial Revolution. He saw capitalism as exacerbating the wealth gap and promoting worker exploitation, since its competitive nature meant the owners of the means of production had to get more out of their workers than they were putting back into them, their pay. Under Marx's model, the workers collectively own the means of production, and they each contribute what they can in labor and resources. And then the proceeds of that production are distributed equally among all citizens, all through a central democratic government. Now, private ownership and businesses still exist in socialist systems, but the general social system is managed by the government and much production of the nation. So for a long time, socialism has been a very dirty word in the United States. But it turns out that very few Americans can actually define it. And variations on socialist ideas are present in capitalist societies, including ours. Think about all the public services funded by our tax dollars. We have fire departments, public schools, public health care. We have a public highway system. Those are all services that we contribute to through our taxes and then share in equally. You don't call the fire department only to be told that they can't come save your house because you didn't pay as much taxes as your neighbor did. Even if what you pay in taxes is different than someone else, you both have the same access to these public resources. Now, communism is the end goal of socialism. It's what Marx believed to be the final stage in the evolution of a functional economy. Under communism, all means of production are owned and operated by the state, and all proceeds are distributed to citizens by the state. No individual or company owns private land or other resources, and no one can just start up a business as they choose. Now, strictly speaking, there never has been a purely communist state. Even places such as China, North Korea, and the former USSR, which you might hear talked about as communist Russia, they never made it completely to this stage. And they still operate or operated with some degree of private enterprise and ownership. In fact, socialist and communist-leaning economies often implode due to discrepancies and due to corruption, the abuse of power by those who are supposed to make decisions for the good of the citizens. And there's also the factor of resistance by citizens who want more control over their lives. So, like I said earlier, there are many different economic systems in theory, and it can be a fun and nerdy dive to read about different systems and imagine what it would be like to live in them. Now, most economies in reality don't adhere 100% to any given theory. They take bits and pieces of different theories and implement them in ways that, hopefully, they think are appropriate for the specific situation and the political structure of their nation. So there's an overview of the big three branches, and we will see you in the next lecture.